Have you ever wondered about the 400 years of silence between the Old and New Testament? What was God doing during this period? These questions often spark a sense of curiosity and perhaps even a slight unease. It's a period in history, nestled between two significant eras, where it seemed as though a divine mute button had been pressed. Yet it's essential to understand that silence does not equate to inactivity. This silence spans from the prophet Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament, to the dawn of the New Testament with the arrival of John the Baptist. It was a period steeped in history, where kingdoms rose and fell, cultures clashed, and the stage was set for a divine intervention unlike any other. Historical and biblical references give us glimpses into these 400 silent years, offering insights into God's master plan. So let's dive into this silent era and understand its significance. Imagine a world where divine intervention seemed absent, where prophecies fell silent. This was the world during the 400 years of silence. This period, often referred to as the intertestamental period, was an era of profound change. The political landscape was turbulent, dominated by powerful empires like the Persians, Greeks, and finally the Romans. These shifts in power brought about significant cultural and societal transformations. The social climate was equally dynamic. There was a rise in literacy, leading to an increased dissemination of ideas. The Jewish diaspora, scattered across these empires, found themselves wrestling with maintaining their identity amidst a sea of diverse cultures. Religiously, this was a time of apparent divine silence. The prophetic voices of the Old Testament had ceased, and the New Testament had yet to be written. The Jewish people were left to rely on the teachings and laws of their forefathers, waiting for a sign from their God. Historian Flavius Josephus in his works provides a vivid account of this period, stating, "From Artaxerxes to our own time, the complete history has been written, but has not been deemed worthy of equal credit with the earlier records, because of the failure of the exact succession of the prophets." This sentiment is echoed by theologian R.C. Sproul, who muses, "God was not speaking. There was no fresh vision, no fresh word. There was a famine in the land, a famine of the hearing of the words of God." But was God truly absent during this period? Remember, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Theologian William Lane Craig puts it succinctly, God's silence does not equate to his non-existence or his lack of care for us. Indeed, this period of silence was a time of preparation, a time of waiting. It was a time when the world was being set up for a divine intervention of a magnitude it had never seen before. But remember, silence does not mean absence. God was at work even in this silence. Why would an ever-present God choose to be silent? This question has puzzled many. As we delve into the purpose of this divine silence, let's bear in mind that silence is not necessarily an absence. Often, it's a quiet space where profound work is accomplished in the background, unseen and unheard. One might wonder, why would a loving God, who promises to be with us always, choose to go silent? The answer, dear friends, lies in the very nature of silence itself. Silence, in its purest form, is not an absence, but rather a potent presence. It is during these quiet times that we are forced to confront our own thoughts, fears, and hopes. Imagine, if you will, a potter at his wheel. As he shapes the clay, he doesn't constantly talk to it. Instead, he works in silence, his hands molding the clay, preparing it for its final form. In the same way, during this 400-year period of silence, God was like that potter, silently shaping the world, preparing it for the arrival of their Messiah. Theological insights suggest that this period of divine silence was indeed a time of preparation. It was a time when the world was being primed and readied for the coming of the Messiah. Just as a farmer prepares the soil before sowing the seeds, God was preparing the hearts and minds of people. It was a time for reflection and introspection, a time to internalize the teachings of the prophets, and a time to yearn for a Savior. It was during this silence that the people's longing for a Messiah grew. The silence amplified their need for salvation, creating a fertile ground for the coming of the Christ. So, in essence, the silence was not a period of divine absence, but rather a time of divine activity. God was not absent. He was there, quietly working behind the scenes, shaping the course of history, preparing the world for the coming of the Messiah. So, in the silence, God was preparing the world for a new chapter. The 400 years of silence hold profound lessons for us today. This chapter in history, often overlooked, can teach us much about navigating our own periods of silence and uncertainty. In the silence, the world continued to turn. Lives were lived and history unfolded. This is no different from our lives today. At times, we may find ourselves in a seemingly quiet phase, where answers are scarce and clarity seems like a distant memory. Yet, life goes on around us, and we must continue to move forward. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it is written, "To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven." This serves as a reminder that seasons of silence are not without purpose. They are times for reflection, for building resilience, and for finding strength within ourselves. During the silent era, people had to rely on their faith, their trust in the divine plan. They had to believe that even in the silence, they were not forgotten. We too, in our personal periods of silence, can find hope and strength in our faith. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase." Silence is not an absence. It is a space for something new to grow. It is a time to deepen our understanding, to seek wisdom, and to prepare for the changes to come. The book of Proverbs tells us that, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." Even in the silence, we are guided. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from the silent era is this: silence does not equate to absence. Just as the sun continues to shine even when hidden by the clouds, so too is divine presence constant, even when it seems silent. So when you find yourself in a period of silence or uncertainty, remember the lessons from the 400 years of silence. Embrace the quiet, trust in the process, and know that you are not alone. Just as God was present during the 400 years of silence, he is with us in our times of silence too. The silence was broken with the birth of a child, the Messiah, marking the beginning of the New Testament. After 400 years of divine silence, the heavens opened and a new era began. This was a moment of profound transformation, a shift from the old to the new, a moment that changed the course of human history forever. This silence-breaking event was heralded by the arrival of Jesus the Messiah, the promised one. It's as if the heavens themselves couldn't contain the joy of this moment. The book of Luke, chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, describes it beautifully. "And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Saviour, which is Christ the Lord." The silent era was not a time of divine absence, but a time of divine preparation. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet before the dawn, the hush before the symphony. It was a time when God was meticulously laying the groundwork for the arrival of his Son. The silent years were a divine comma, not a period, a pause, not an end. And then the silence was broken. Not with a thunderous roar or a grand spectacle, but with the soft cry of a newborn baby. In a humble stable to a modest couple, under the most ordinary circumstances, the extraordinary happened. God became man. The Word became flesh. The silence was broken. As we reflect on the end of the silent era, we see that it wasn't just about the waiting, but about what was to come. It was a prelude, a build-up, a crescendo leading to the grand finale. The 400 years of silence were not empty years, but years filled with divine purpose and intention. The 400 years of silence were a prelude to the greatest story ever told. The story of redemption, of grace, of love. A story that continues to unfold, echoing through the ages, whispering hope to every heart that listens. A story that broke the silence and forever changed the world. In our lives, we may face periods of silence, but remember, God is always at work. The 400 years of silence between the Old and the New Testament were not futile. They were filled with divine purpose, molding the world for the coming of the Messiah. It's the same with our lives. Even in our quietest moments when we feel isolated and unheard, we are not alone. God is shaping us, preparing us for our own unique purpose. Remember the lessons from this silence. Silence is not absence. It's a time of preparation, a time of growth. It's a time when God is silently at work in our lives. So when you encounter your own period of silence, remember the 400 years. For more insights and teachings like these, do consider subscribing. Your support aids us in continuing to share these enlightening messages. In times of silence, remember the 400 years. God is still speaking, even when he seems silent.